Falcons enter week 15 against the Panthers in what is actually a must win. I think we've said must win probably 10 different times this season. Now, all of those have been big games. This one is an absolute must win. You lose this game, you have very little chance of winning the NFC South or making the playoffs as a wild card team. And just the morale of the team would have to be shot if you lose to the 1-12 Panthers. Now, we've talked about how this is kind of a sketchy matchup. You got a team that has nothing to lose. I know they don't have a coach, but they still have nothing to lose. They're playing at home. The Falcons aren't talented enough to overlook anyone. But I will say I feel much more confident about this game today than I did earlier in the week because of the injury situation. The Falcons were out with, at the end of the last game, they had like 7 starters missing, 8 starters missing. It looks like pretty much all of those guys are going to be back. Obviously, Grady Jarrett is out for the season. Caleb McGarry has not practiced yet. But all the other guys have returned to practice. Contavious Street is also out. But, Nate Landman, David Onyemata, Jeff Okudah, all those guys returned to practice. And if there was one guy that you could probably miss, it would probably be McGarry because Storm Norton has been pretty decent in his 2 games since with McGarry out.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that. I honestly, I will argue that. I mean, I wouldn't have mind Jeff Okudah being out so we could get a little bit more Clark Phillips. I mean, it feels like we have a diamond in the rough there. Whereas, Storm Norton has been serviceable, but to what extent? Now we're playing a Panthers team, Brian Burns, Derek Brown. If there is one facet of this Panthers team that is still, elite, it's that defensive front. They've got guys up there. So this is going to be a big test for Storm Norton if Caleb McGarry isn't out. Not practicing all the way up till Friday is a major concern. The other guys were practicing in a limited capacity, so we don't know their designations, but it seems they're trending in the right direction. But I would not mind seeing more of Clark Phillips. You're not going to sit D. Alford, who's been a revelation in the slot this year, and Jeff Okudah's, he was the starter for a reason. But I would love to see more of Clark Phillips, where, Jeff Okudah has struggled in recent weeks. Maybe it has something to do with the injury. I don't know. Obviously cornerback play is so tumultuous. 1 week you can look like an all-pro and the next week you can look like, total crap. We just saw AJ Terrell lock down Mike Evans, future Hall of Famer, who normally torches the Falcons. And earlier in the season, people were talking about Terrell, severely regressing. Long story short, it's always somewhere in the middle. So maybe Okudah bounces back, but I don't know. I really want to see Clark Phillips.
I think we might. I think Okudah's kind of been a weak link in the secondary for the last 4 or 5 weeks before the injury, and I think Clark Phillips was really solid last week against Chris Godwin. That was a much bigger test than what he faced against the New York Jets. I know the Jets receivers are decent, but with Tim Boyle throwing the ball, they didn't have a ton of opportunity. So I wouldn't be surprised that if there's any question about Okudah's health, even if he's active, that maybe Clark Phillips gets the start because I think he's earned it. So I agree with you there. And I'm not necessarily just handing the job back to Okudah because I think Clark Phillips has played well enough to earn an opportunity. But regardless of who starts there, having both of them is critical. And I think they're going to have the advantage of against whoever they are up against because this Carolina, outside of Adam Thielen, who's 35 years old and the best receiver on the Carolina Panthers, they don't have much of a passing attack at all. I think the biggest thing here is getting David Onyemata back. I think we saw a big difference when Street exited last week and no Onyemata and no Grady Jarrett. Obviously, getting him back because the only way I see the Panthers moving the ball is if they can somehow establish something on the ground without those guys. So I think getting Onyemata back is a huge deal. But I feel a lot more confident with the news of these injuries, and hopefully most of them can play.
Yeah, Onyemata is very easily the most important designation here to monitor. He's still limited capacity, but again, everything from what Arthur Smith's saying, tone, suggestive, it looks like he's going to suit up, and he is by far the most critical piece that it could potentially miss. Nate Landman's been an absolute revelation. Jeff Okudah, it's always great to have multiple cornerbacks healthy. Caleb McGarry, obviously you're starting right tackle. You'd love to have him. But to your point, if there's one way the Panthers upset the Falcons, it's going to be establishing the run and kind of mucking up this game. David Onyemata has been our best defensive lineman, bar none. Even with Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata was outplaying him. So his presence is overly important.
Yeah. All right. Well, coming up after the break, we're going to get into the fun part. We're going to do the predictions. Falcons, Panthers. Can they beat the 1-12 Panthers?